So here we are. We're at a bridge, and this episode is a doorway. Today, I'm going to share with you the story behind the podcast, the multidimensional events in my own life that led me to creating it. And I'm going to be very transparent about the vulnerability I have felt putting myself out there and how it all ties into my work as a novelist and as a somatic therapist. But I'm going to start with a story, the story of how an angel appeared to me in my grandmother's backyard when I was a 6-year-old child. It's probably the most defining moment of my life because it was precisely that experience that taught me to trust a world that no one else could see. I've spoken about this in one of my Substack articles, which I link in the show notes, but I want to retell it here because it's relevant to the reason I finally found the courage to go beyond my comfort zone and create this podcast, as well as publish my novel, of course. So, what follows is the story of the angel, and it starts with the little 6-year-old girl that I was, swinging on the swing set at my grandmother's house, trying to understand eternity. As a 6-year-old child, I had quite a lively dreamscape. I experienced every night that I was flying high over my town, over cities, and then before I woke up, I would kind of tumble down this brightly colored tunnel and land with a clunk back in my physical body and then wake up very, very suddenly. And this happened every night. So in my dreamscape, I was flying. And then in my physical reality as a young child, I began to fervently pray that God would give me angel wings because I believed that this was something that was possible because obviously it happened to me at night. And so one day after dinner with my grandparents, my grandfather and I ended up with the what was called the wishbone from the chicken dinner. And we decided that we would break this wishbone and then whoever, won obviously was meant to get their wish come true. Pretty macabre kind of tradition. Nevertheless, I won this. I had this, I guess, bigger portion of the wishbone. And my wish, which I didn't share with anyone in my family, was that I would be given my angel wings. Now, because I was a child of enormous faith in the way that children are, and I believed, very, very fervently that God was there for me and the angels were real, and that if the rule was the person who won the wishbone would get their wish, I had absolutely no doubt this would happen to me. So I prayed and prayed and I began to wait for my wish to arrive. And one day I was on my swinging on the swing set in my grandmother's backyard. I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house as a child while my mom was working. On the roof of my grandmother's house, I saw what looked like packages, and I was convinced that the angels had appeared and God had given me my angel wings in this beautiful gift package. So I said to my grandfather, who absolutely adored me. I was the first grandchild in the family, and we had a very special relationship. I think I've shared the story in another episode of my very clear premonition of his death when I was a teenager. But in any case, as a child, we were, very close, and he adored me, and it was absolutely mutual. And I went to him and said, Grandpa, there are packages on the roof, and I know that God has left these for me. So can you please retrieve them? I don't think I told him that they were my angel wings, but I was absolutely convinced that they were. And my grandfather, being my grandfather, agreed. For some reason, I guess well, that was just, we just adored each other in that way. But I look back and I laugh because he got his ladder out, and here he's climbing to the top of the house because his 6-year-old granddaughter has said to him, "There are presents for me up there, Grandpa. You must retrieve them." So he climbs to the roof, he goes up to the top, and he inevitably returns empty handed. And with a long face, he says, "Ugh, I'm really sorry, Michelle, but there was not a package for you on the roof. They were actually the roof tiles piled up in a way, and it looked like a package, but they were just roof tiles." Well, this did not dissuade me at all. I simply understood that they weren't there yet, they hadn't arrived yet, and so I continued to pray and patiently waited. And then one day it happened. Again, I was swinging in the backyard, and swinging was something I did a lot as a child. I loved the motion. I loved how it made me feel. I felt free. I felt like I was flying. And I would often look out to the sky and think about this concept of infinity, and that the sky went on and the universe went on, and there were planets and stars that went out for infinity, and my brain would kind of break over the whole concept. It was kind of my liminal experience of choice as a child. I would just contemplate this until my brain kind of did some kind of weird thing, and I would, I think, slip into this contemplative other state of consciousness. So anyway, I was doing this one day, contemplating infinity as my body experienced the somatic. I look back and I think, well, the motion of swinging must have been this really deeply parasympathetic experience. And then I had this consciousness shift, and I came off the swing, and the neighbor child was there. Now, she was about 3, I was about 6. Sometimes she came over to play, and I'll never forget, I came off the swing, and we threw a ball back and forth a couple of times, and then the ball rolled away, and I went around to the side of the house to retrieve the ball, and she put a hand on my back and said, "Come up very slowly because there's someone here." Now, in retrospect, I think this is all just incredibly impossible, because why would a 3-year-old child behave this way? There was something very non ordinary going on. I don't know. She wasn't behaving like a 3-year-old in that moment. She was behaving like an adult. But I remember leaning over, retrieving the ball, and having her say to me, "Come up very slowly, Michelle." And I came up very slowly with this ball in my hands. And when I lifted my eyes, I saw the this white gown, and as my eyes lifted higher and higher, there standing over me was this enormous angel in the full Christian tradition, with the wings, the robe, but an absolutely enormous presence, like quite a large angel, female. And at this stage, I don't know where this 3-year-old neighbor was. It was just me and this angel. And she looked right into my eyes and she said, "Michelle, we have heard your prayers." And it makes me laugh now, because I think I was quite an insistent prayer. I was very insistent as a supplicant, and no doubt my spirit team was laughing their heads off, going, "Oh my gosh, someone, please, someone go speak to this little girl, because she's driving us mad. She's praying every night for wings." But she looked at me right in my eyes and she said, "Michelle, we've heard your prayers, and you will be granted your wish." And then she gave me a date, which of course I don't remember now. And probably, I blocked it out because I thought, crap, is this the date I'm going to die? Is that what she told me when I was 6? But she was very loving and had this very kind, loving presence. And she, the most important thing she said was looking in my eyes and saying, like, "Michelle, we have heard your prayers and you will get your wings. You will get your wings," she told me. And the next thing I know, I'm running inside the house. I tell my grandmother I've seen an angel. She says to me, "That must be, you must have had a nap. You must have fallen asleep. You must have imagined it. You must have been daydreaming." And I thought, well, she's wrong. She obviously doesn't know what she's talking about, because it's the most real thing that's ever happened to me. And it was so real that for years, 4 years, every once in a while, every few months, I would take a little chair out and sit either in my grandmother's garden at the side of the house or in my front garden at my mom's house. I would sit and wait for this angel to come back. I waited and waited, just thinking, well, she visited me once, she'll do it again. And she never appeared again in that way. I know that it taught me that things that you can't see or experience with your 5 senses are still just as real, and sometimes are even more impactful than the events that happen in the so called 3D materialist reality. So, fast forward to the creation of this podcast. I didn't know what it was about when I started writing it, and I probably didn't know what it was about until I finished recording episode 9 just last week. It was very mysterious because I thought I knew what it was about. I knew that because I was publishing my novel IKONA, I wanted to create a podcast on multidimensionality as a companion. I didn't really know why. I thought it would be a good idea to have something out there that would kind of match it, that would give me a project. I've often done nonfiction research work in tandem with my creative work. In fact, when I was doing my PhD, I was working on my doctoral research, and at the same time, I was writing my first novel. I've always loved this flow of doing a bit of creative fiction writing and then going back to research. So it kind of all made sense from that point of view. And so I wrote the first few episodes and I named the entire arc of this series of the Shattering Place podcast. But when I finished outlining it all in my first few episodes, I found that it was an awful lot about healing, and kind of talking about a way to heal, a new healing paradigm, which is, look, obviously healing is a career I've been working in as a therapist, but there was this voice in my head, or this sense that that wasn't it. That's not what this podcast was meant to be about. And I knew I had to trash the entire thing and start from scratch. And that was just weeks before I wanted to publish episode 1 to coordinate it with the publication of my novel. And it's worth sharing with you that the old me, the me before an embodied experience of awakening, that old me would not have even thought about checking out material that I'd worked hard on, because by then it was about 15,000 words and I named every episode and etc. The old me would have just pushed through, made it work, but the new me knew that I wasn't in charge of my life anymore. Basically, I absolutely understood that there was something that wanted to be born through me that wasn't coming from me, and I knew that I hadn't quite got it right. So I really listened. I was 2 weeks away from launching, and I had this feeling that what I really needed to do was create an entirely new paradigm for human evolution. Now, not that any of the things I've said haven't been said before, because, everything's been said before, but I felt that it was very clear that my mission was to organize the material and present it in such a way that it was clear and accessible and very strong. It's a paradigm, it's a way of viewing and exploring reality. And I'll admit, I had a massive wobble about it. And maybe sometimes I still do wake up and go, what the hell am I doing? I mean, okay, yes, I have an academic background. I am quite comfortable with research and so on. I am a therapist. I do psychotherapy and body work, which includes energy work, includes other things. But the reality of my life is that I've lived in the suburbs for decades. I'm not connected to anyone with any influence. I've surrounded by children and stepchildren. It's quite isolated in that sense. I've never considered myself kind of a thought leader, certainly not a public figure, even though I've taught things. I've taught things, I've led retreats and so on, but never beyond my immediate environment. So this felt like something new and a little bit scary. And let me be even more honest here again. I've really always disliked the pressure to lead with qualifications or to virtue signal success. To be honest, for years, I have navigated deep disappointment in myself. I mean, yes, in my 20s, which was, 30 years ago, I was a star student with a PhD scholarship, but I chose motherhood, which I don't regret. It has been the most amazing experience. And I became a long term caretaker, and I faced a very painful personal journey with all of that. And for 20 years, life was hectic. And I'm not going to go into a lot of personal details about what that looked like, in my personal life, because my family deserves privacy. And I struggle with this need to confess everything because people deserve some privacy, my children, people in my family. But needless to say, there was a lot of caretaking and a lot of various struggles in my personal life. And I have also struggled with financial and housing instability, moving almost every year, year after year after year, because I don't own a house. And all this time I didn't publish, and writing was the one thing I most wanted to do with my whole life other than motherhood. So, this is all to say that if traditional success looks like one thing, my life looked like something else entirely. I got to this career as a therapist late. I mean, okay, I started in my 30s, but the podcasting and the novel publishing is late. I thought I'd be a published author by my second child, but instead it took 3 children and 25 years and hundreds of rejections. And then I had to publish it myself because the industry didn't want it. My agent changed her mind about it. And when I started this podcast, I had no savings, just a tight practice and, experience and determination. I still don't have a lot of savings, but I'm working on it. The thing is, I refuse to lead with societal approved virtue signaling of success. And I equally refuse to trauma bond for clicks. I don't want to bond with my audience over, all the hard stuff, right? I want to give you reality, humility, and also hope. So I really hope this validates those of you who feel like you're behind or it's too late, because it's clearly not. There is strength found in the struggle, and I'm good at what I do, not because I have loads of qualifications. Okay, they help, but lots of people have qualifications. I'm good at what I do because I have qualifications in counseling, psychotherapy, various trauma-informed somatic modalities. Yes, also because I've attended to my own healing. I have done that work of, really looking at my wounding and really doing as much healing as I could. And I've gone on a really profound awakening journey, and that has been incredible. But also because I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients over 15 years, nearly daily, very often during the week. So, anyway, at one point, I was creating my podcast and thinking about, my gosh, why am I doing this? And then I remembered something when I was thinking all these thoughts about, who am I to do this? Oh my gosh, I'm just this middle-aged woman in Australia who knows nobody. But I remembered something that I'd forgotten. Before I did my PhD, when I was about 23 years old, I had the idea suddenly that I needed to write a book arguing that we were all one. Now, that we were all part of one consciousness. Um, Now, this is hardly a new concept for us today, right now. But to put it in context, for me at 23 years of age, while I have had loads of experiences, obviously I'd had non-ordinary experiences. I had never even come across the idea of non-duality, not at age 23. I had never done the research around the science of consciousness. I didn't even really know about morphic fields or Rupert Sheldrake. I'd always thought, I'm me, you're you, there's a God. I'd never explored these unitive experiences, these experiences of unity, unitive experiences of being one. Nevertheless, there I was in my early 20s with this idea that that was in fact true, and I had to prove it somehow and start writing a book about it. At some point, though, I went, what the heck am I even doing? I'm 23. I'm not a spiritual teacher. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Like, this is a later project. This is a crazy thing to do now. So I put it aside and I focused on my doctoral thesis, went to Ukraine, did my research, became a mom. The rest is history, right? Um, but here I was thinking about that in the context of this podcast, and it was kind of a full circle moment. I thought, well, who am I not to create a paradigm now at 51, nearly 52? Who am I not to say that we need to think entirely different about it all? Because, it's been nearly it's been nearly 30 years since that experience, and I've, lots happened since then. So here I am, and actually being very vulnerable and transparent with you listeners, because I think a lot of people who take a leap like this navigate this internal questioning of, who am I to do this? What makes me think that I can? I'm not connected. I'm just doing this on my own, in my own head, with my own guidance. I don't have a professional context or contacts. I left academia years ago, and other than professional supervision, which I've had over the years for my therapy work, I don't have colleagues. I'm not attached to institutions. My literary agent and I, we actually ended our relationship because she found my novel too much, too cross genre. You know, People either know me as their therapist or they know me as a mother, and often those who know me as a mother don't know I'm a therapist, and people who know I'm a therapist don't know about this whole other life of raising children in the suburbs. So, of course, in my mind, I think, you know, who am I to do this? But then, I think of like Ken Wilber, who founded integral theory, that growing up, waking up process that is the title of my Substack. and how he left institutions to create an entire body of work outside of the academic system. And for example, Jude Currivan, who left high level corporate life to get a degree in physics and to start writing about consciousness and physics. So, and then I remembered that maybe I've always been trying to do this one way or the other, and now it's just the time. It's just the time, right? We have these moments when life comes together. We have a confluence of, I don't know, maybe it's destiny and capacity and, um, all kinds of skills have come together, etc. And I have the distinct feeling I'm not in charge of this, that I'm being lived through. And that's exactly how my novel was created. When I wrote IKONA, I had an idea that I wanted to create a structure. And I go really into that structure in episode 8 of my podcast, and how the structure of IKONA lends itself to a particular kind of transmission or somatic effect on the listener. But when I wrote that, I didn't have that as a conscious intention. I knew it needed to be a certain way, and I felt that impulse. I felt the rhythm of it in my body. I felt the structure of it in my body and my psyche. And I could feel how everything needed to fit together like a puzzle. And um, I planned it over 10 years when I wasn't writing. I had given up on writing because I'd been, rejected for 2 decades by the publishing industry. And I was a single parent just trying to put food on the table. I couldn't write. I didn't have the bandwidth, but I felt like I had to understand the structure of this creative project, and I would make diagrams and draw pictures. I knew it had to be fit together a certain way, but it was only afterwards when I really sat with it and looked at it that I understood there was something happening that was having an effect on me. Even as I was editing it and reviewing it, there was a transmission. I could feel something shift in my consciousness, and certain passages I would just cry every time I read them. And it never seemed like they were my words. I can't take ownership of that. When I look at the structure and the narrative and even the tone of the language, it seems clear to me that it was just something that moved through me, and I was just a skilled enough craftsperson. That I had the tools for the job and the consciousness to allow it, that I'm just the perfect confluence of skill, experience, insight. I mean, I've been writing fiction for 25 years, so there's that, right? It's like I just cosmically put up my hand and said, yeah, I'll take that book. Thank you very much. I think Elizabeth Gilbert writes about that in her book on creativity, that it's like there are these ideas in the collective consciousness field, and they're just there. And she has some great stories of that, the similar ideas that have come to people. And it's just a matter of going, yep, that's me. I'll take that project. I'll write that. Thank you, God, kind of thing. And here's the thing, it seems like maybe something like that's happened with this podcast, because as I wrote the episodes for this iteration of the Shattering Place, I had no idea where I was going. I mapped out an arc of what I thought each episode was about. I named each episode. I created a summary of what I thought it was about. And then I sat down and I wrote it every week. Each episode is about 5,000 words and includes a lot of research and really getting clear on myself about what my message is. What is it that I'm compelled to say? And then each time I finished an episode, I'd be like, well, now I know what that was about. That's really cool. It's actually about this. It's not about that. It's actually about this. And then I would write the next episode and I would look at that one. And then I'd look at the previous one and I'd be like, oh, that's how they fit together. It all makes sense now. And with each episode, I would feel more deeply that I understood what the puzzle was about. I did not expect in episode 8 to unpack how an illuminated manuscript might have an effect on consciousness and how it relates to the novel. And I didn't think in episode 9 I'd get into the purpose of human experience. And just like with my novel IKONA, when I finished writing series 1 of this podcast and finished recording it and let it really sink in, I realized I'd kind of mapped a whole personal unfolding from a human whose life is shattering to a planet that's awakening. I mean, far out. My little Michelle brain could not have conceived of that in the beginning. It was like I've done in a nonfiction context what I've done in the fictional context. And when I finished episode 9, I actually wept with gratitude. I actually will transparently and honestly and vulnerably share with you that I cried because I felt like this is absolutely has nothing to do with me. Like, I am just scribing it down, you know? And there's no question it's part of a larger plan. The early numbers on Substack, where it's hosted, they're incredible. It's had nearly 2,000 downloads in just 8 weeks, which is unusual for a very niche podcast. And that's just the beginning of something. I think back to the angel I saw as a child and how passionately I wished to transcend this world and fly, and this promise that she made me that I would get my wings. And I still, look, I don't know exactly what that metaphor is. Is it that I'll fly once I die, or is it that I'll realize something profound that's like a metaphor, like you'll get your wings? But one thing I know absolutely for sure, and that is that seeing that angel was the anchor I needed for my whole entire life to get me to a point where I am reminded, I know that my loyalty is not to the world I can see. My loyalty is to a world I can't see with my physical eyes. That's what that experience with that angel taught me. It taught me loyalty, to be loyal to the field. I mean, look, it's so easy to grow up in the world and be loyal to your culture, your society, your religion, your family, to be loyal to even your wounds, to be loyal to your pains, to be loyal to your expectations, but to be loyal to something bigger than you that you can't see, something intangible, something that is of God, of the divine. That's a really big ask. To be told, well, like your life is really shit and there are all these struggles, but you can trust that you're actually really safe because you're a child of God, or you're a consciousness, or you're a soul just having an experience. Like, these are really bitter pills to swallow. And I understand this very deeply because I've worked with hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000, maybe more than, I don't know. I've never counted. But I work with people one on one, and I work in complex trauma. And the work I do with people is with really complicated stuff, like people who've navigated toxic family systems, narcissism, childhood sexual and emotional and physical abuse, sex trafficking, even substance abuse. I can't say in good faith that it's in any way easy or even reasonable when one is navigating such difficult stuff to shift gears and to go, okay, I trust it all. I mean, your body's entire job is to keep you safe. And when your biology is survival biology, as I've spoken about a lot in episode 9, your body will keep bringing you back to what is safe, what's not safe. And it's very difficult in the circumstance of difficulty and suffering to shift into trust, to shift out of safety and into something greater than your life as a human in a body. And actually, that's why I created my 90-day program, because I really love supporting people through that process, to offer companionship through a terrain of repatterning. I'm not trying to sell transformation or breakthrough or manifestation. And if you've listened to my episodes, you know I don't do spiritual bypass. I do somatic literacy. I do nervous system liberation. I facilitate repatterning. And the way I begin that process is by orienting you to the deeper architecture of your life, beginning with evolutionary astrology and assessing your birth patterning. If you could see what your soul came in to learn and experience, what your strengths are, what energies you've come from, whether ancestral or past life, what the roadblocks are, then you could start to see your life as an inevitable victory. You could begin to shift from a survival based physiology into a transmission based physiology, beyond safety and into being a lighthouse. And then we ground that possibility in a framework that includes that much loved word in therapy, evidence based modalities. That is to say, not speculative work, not ungrounded techniques, but processes with a body of evidence behind them, processes I've trained in, woven together with, of course, the psychic, the spiritual, and the mythic architecture that gives your life its deeper coherence. So if you're shedding a survival identity, if you're crossing a threshold, if you're ready to repattern your nervous system and reclaim your creative and psychic authority, really aligning with your most authentic self, your soul self, then this companionship based one on one program is something you should consider. My work is about making you you again, but the most multidimensional version of you, the most authentic version of you. You can apply for this one on one container via the link in my show notes. And to be transparent, I likely won't be offering this level of depth beyond this year. The podcast is expanding, and I want to protect the quality of the work so I can meet people at the depth that's required. So if you've been feeling the pull, this is the window. Now, back to the podcast. So, there was a moment between the decision to create this podcast and the moment I hit publish. I had recorded it. I sat in my armchair at home with my cat, my senior cat, and I felt nervous. I felt tremors of nerves, and I realized that there was no going back. Here I was proposing a new paradigm and stepping into a multidimensional landscape. I felt that sense of imminent birth, like I had before I birthed my first child more than 23 years ago. This sense of being a portal, the body as a portal. I knew that whether I birthed it or not, published the podcast, there was no going back. The heartbeat of this new creation was already beating inside me. I was already a mother. I was just midwifing it into the world. So, so here we are. Season 1 of this podcast has been a descent, a remembering, a stripping away of everything that wasn't mine to carry alone. All these truths and theories in my head. It's been raw and honest and strangely intimate, like speaking into a dark room with dim lights and feeling that you're all there listening, maybe clutching your mugs of tea or coffee or hot chocolate, nodding along. And now, here we are at the moment before the moment. This episode is a doorway. It's a bridge between the world we've been exploring together and the one we're about to enter. It's a pause, a pulse, a gathering of breath before the next exhale. Season 2 is coming, and it's different. It's different, guys. More collaborative, more electric, more firsthand, more fun. I've already started recording, so I can tell you there is laughter, there is camaraderie. But before we step into that, we need to mark this moment. We need to honor the threshold. We need to stand together and feel the shift that's already happening. Are you ready? In season 1, we deconstructed that old house, scientific materialism. We sat with the shattering, mapped the multidimensionality of our own bodies, and stood in the clear space of emergence. We established the theory of the new human. Now we look at how that is practiced, how that happens in the world. In this next season, I'm opening the doors to be joined by artists, healers, scientists, visionaries, practitioners, those who are already inhabiting this new paradigm. We're moving beyond the what and into the how. These are the conversations from the edges of the known, real world stories of what happens when we stop pretending that we're separate, when we stop pretending that only what you can see is real. This is the collective broadcast in action. Join me for season 2, the interviews. I'm your host, Michelle Dixon. Let's investigate what we can build together. And as a final note, I know that many of you listening are already walking this path. You are the ones experimenting with these concepts in your own studios, clinics, and lives. If you have a story of the impossible made real, if you're working at the intersection of multidimensionality and grounded action, I want to hear from you. This season is about the collective broadcast, and that includes your voice. Reach out to me at my Substack. Let's explore the edges of the known together. And if you've been with me for this long, first of all, I love you. I'm so grateful. It brings me so much joy that there's resonance with something that means so much to me. And I would really appreciate it if you left a rating on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast, and even a review if that's possible. It really helps this podcast become discoverable and therefore helpful to others who are navigating these moments in their lives and need a little bit of a reframe and some hope. Thank you very much, everyone.